Hey guys, Scott from phaseandplayer.com here. Look, you've seen the title of the video, so let's not waste any time and get right to it. This is a review of John Company 2nd Edition. So I'm going to say right at the top, a copy of this game was provided to me by the publisher, so naturally take any praise I give it as being paid off, and any criticism I levy against it as being fluff and made up, just to make the review seem fair and balanced. So with that out of the way, if you're just here to know if the game is good or not, I'll just straight up say yes, it rules. But it is certainly not for everyone. How do you feel about negotiation games? That's what this game is at its core. It's got a ton of space for fun, dynamic negotiation, and is honestly some of the most social, above-the-table gaming I've had in years. Do you want a serious take on a very dark, capitalistic period of history? This game really makes you feel like you're living part of this history, and accordingly makes you feel like you're a bit of a jackass for playing by its rules, which is of course perfectly thematic, but it may or may not be right for you and your group. Do you want something with low randomness and really tight strategic gameplay? This is not that game, pass it by. It has strategy, don't get me wrong, but it is not tight. It's got a billion dice rolls, and they're all binary, and if you succeed or fail, you will without a doubt plan an ideal turn that totally falls apart due to a single, unavoidable die roll that cannot be redone. Finally, are you someone with the first edition of this game? This is the second edition after all. Well, if you like that, I really think you should upgrade. This one's basically better in every single way. And this is coming from someone that really loves old editions of games. If those bullet points are enough for you, then hey, thanks for stopping by. Be sure to click the subscribe button on your way out. If you want me to get into more specifics though, well, keep watching. So originally released in 2017 through Sierra Madre Games, and now, in 2022 in a totally revamped second edition, John Company is a game in which players work together as families trying to run the historic British East India Company. Players will operate the company's trade in India, manage their shipbuilding capabilities and military capabilities, forcibly install governorships throughout the subcontinent, try to quell unrest caused by your colonialist ambitions, and a whole host of other endeavors. While players do collaboratively operate a portion of this whole company, do not take this as a sign of a cooperative game, because despite the need to work together, there can only be a single winner in the end. John Company does offer plenty of opportunity for backhanded, selfish play, as well as bouts of friendly teamwork, and at its core is a no-holds-barred negotiation game, with plenty to barter with and trade, and really a whole lot to say about the EIC's ugly, ugly history. So does this all sound exciting to you? Hey, I mean, it is. Like I said before, the game's a super blast to play. It allows for fun role-playing as a ruthless capitalist, gleefully working together to make the company as successful as it possibly can be, collaboratively discussing strategic choices with others at the table, happily voting in laws that impact the rules of the game going forward, and carving out pieces of India to open up new opportunities for everybody. And then inevitably, those opportunities call, and players will go into business for themselves, inching closer and closer to overstepping their bounds by skimming just an extra dollar or two off the top of the prize pool to personally get ahead, forcing and goading other, more honorable company-focused players to pull double duty to keep the East India Company afloat. And this is the real push and pull of the game. There can only be a single winner in the end, so you have to figure out how you personally are going to get the cash that you need to buy victory points to be that solitary winner. But if you're too selfish, not only will you put the company in jeopardy, ending the game upon its failure, but you'll also quickly realize that this is indeed a really social game. It's very player-run, and a lot of players have unilateral control over hiring and other activities. If you're deemed a pariah who cannot be trusted with important responsibility, you might have a really hard time getting ahead. Unless, of course, you're willing to pony up more money and favors than the other players. It is a really exciting, dynamic game that gives you the highs of working together, as well as the highs of trying to be a real sneak and hoping that nobody notices that you're being super untrustworthy. But I will say, there are a few major factors to consider when you're wondering if your group is going to enjoy the game or not. Will they be willing to make deals, discuss things at length, pull proverbial levers just to see what may happen 1 or 2 or 3 rounds from now? How about rolling lots and lots and lots of dice to figure out if all of your actions succeed or fail or awfully catastrophically fail? If you're more of a fan of games with low luck and highly logical, controllable systems to work in, this game just might be a bit of a culture shock for you, and it might not really go over very well. You have to be able to grease some palms, make friends in powerful places if you want to get ahead, And you're also going to have to be really lucky on those many, many dice rolls. At nearly every avenue, you're going to have to pray that the dice gods look favorably upon you. With more money, you can stack the odds and roll more dice to increase your chances of success, but before you can do that, you're likely going to have the person in charge of your office's money allow you to spend it. Again, negotiation game. Full stop, if a highly social game with a lot of push your luck and gambling does not sound appealing on top of what's a pretty heavy rule set, a playtime that pushes 4 or more hours, and a really depressing theme rooted in real history, pass this game on by. On the other hand, if this all sounds like a hoot, it is. It's a huge hoot. And one of the biggest hooters around is this so-called thing called a promise card. And it's something that really separates John Company from its other negotiation-heavy brethren. In many negotiation games, deals that can be immediately satisfied, like a direct exchange of money or assets, is binding. But long-term deals, like, if I do this thing for you right now, would you do this other thing for me later, is non-binding. Someone could agree to those terms, and then 3 rounds from now, when it comes time for them to make good on the promise they made, they can just say no. These promise cards in John Company, which each player has a set of, are in some ways an answer to that non-binding conundrum. John Company's a game where you cannot do everything on your own, and this fact demands that you leverage power being held by other players. Additionally, who has what sort of power can change frequently and unexpectedly. You may not be the chairman of the company right now, but you could well be next turn, so deals players need to make must consider such future hypotheticals. Promise cards are a way to turn otherwise non-binding deals into something that can be cashed in on in very specific ways when you return the card to their original owner. Some of them are as simple as just demanding a couple bucks, or allowing you to appoint your deadbeat brother into an office that you just happen to be the hiring manager of. Or maybe, when it comes time to vote something into law that is so world-changingly significant that it will directly impact who may win or lose the entire game, hey, you can cash in a card that you happen to have that allows you to use someone's votes as though they were your own. Not only do these cards act as very effective and enforceable IOUs, but the game state is varied enough that the given value of each card will differ from player to player. This means that you can make lopsided deals that do not favor you right now, but later on, when you go to cash those cards in, the contextual value of the cards that you've taken from another player may suddenly have increased, and now you're getting something incredible, or taking away something vital, or both. It also means that if you're on the outs, you still might have something to offer other players. And in fact, making deals with somebody that does not have a lot of power creates incentive to push them into powerful positions so that their promises can be cashed in on in ways that might offer great benefit in the future. It's sort of an interesting comeback system that you barely notice existing as it works. It's pretty sweet. However, the sweetest, most exciting moments in the game might come from private firms that are introduced after company deregulation. All right, look, I know private firms and deregulation doesn't sound super exciting, but I swear that these things upend everything if or when they happen during a game. Essentially in the game, you have the central company that all players are operating within so long as the company maintains its trade monopoly granted by the British Parliament, which it can certainly do so long as the company remains reputable and profitable enough. But if things go south, which could happen if there is enough unrest in India, or players fail at making successful trades, or for a number of other reasons, then the player acting as prime minister may call a vote to deregulate the company, which basically bails out the company while also allowing players to kickstart their own private trade operations in India called firms, which will sort of compete with the company itself. If you opt to start a private firm, your family board will flip over to its firm side, revealing the option for purchasing private ships and an area to take on shares from other players acting as investors. These things allow you to go trade in India yourself, potentially taking away precious cash from the company, and also will pay dividends and gain endgame victory points for each share held. It can be a gamble, especially if other players opt to start their own firms to compete with you, or if you find yourself desperate enough to allow too many outside investors into your firm and suddenly find yourself facing a hostile takeover. Firms are a really wild spin on an already pretty wild game, and the addition of them in most of the scenarios available really make the game feel complete. So I've got a lot of great things to say about the game, obviously. I'm excited about it. But the game does have its prickly bits too that can be a bit of a turnoff. Setup can be a real pain, as there are a lot of discrete tokens and cards that need to be allocated in very specific areas every time you go to play. There are several scenarios to play, and to some degree they sort of feel like pieces of a larger whole. They are pretty fun on their own, but I really couldn't shake the feeling that I was only getting a fraction of the entire thing, especially with the first scenario, which lacks firms entirely, and the third scenario that starts with firms available at the jump, therefore lacking the tension of them potentially showing up later. In fact, for my tastes, if I'm not playing the full campaign, the only scenario that I'm really interested in is the middle one, because I feel as though it tells the best stories and has the most dramatic mechanical shifts due to the potential, but not promise, for company deregulation. John Company is also a game that encourages specialization in its family actions every round. Family actions are things each player will take early on in each round. They're things like buying shares in a company, buying workshops or shipyards, or adding like military enlistees or low-level writers into the company's presidencies to get them a foot in the door. These actions are an essential first step to both the company functioning and you as a player having opportunity to make money and gain VP, and it will dictate a lot of the efficacy of actions in the rest of the round. I say these lead to specialization because in John Company, you can double up on the family action if you take the same one on successive rounds. So for instance, if you buy a share in round 1, you could buy 2 in round 2 if you take that action again. This is an interesting system, but I've heard dismay from several players in my groups over multiple games that the system makes them feel like they get pigeonholed into doing the same thing round to round, and that there's not enough time to pivot away in most scenarios lest you lose a lot of your action efficiency against players who happen to pick the right action on round 1 and don't feel the need to change on 2 or 3 or 4. I can understand why the system exists, and in full campaign play there is time to pivot to new actions, but in the smaller scenarios, which I imagine is how the vast majority of players will be playing the game, it sort of feels on occasion like you're playing the chump trying to play catch up. And then there's the setting, the British East India Company in the 17 and 1800s. While I am talking about this in the same breath as potential shortcomings, the setting is incredibly well implemented, and in nearly every game I have played, it spurred discussion about it and has encouraged me to go read about the history of John Company myself to become more educated on the subject matter. The back of the manual even has a write-up from designer Cole Worley with many recommendations on learning more yourself. Additionally, the game uses historical art throughout and is steeped so heavily in the era that you can't really help but feel like you are a part of it, and accordingly feel a terrible, terrible dread because of what the game demands of you. The EIC's conquest of India is visceral and authentic, and perfectly framed as a series of upsetting and exploitative voyages for the purpose of what? Buying a cool house, owning some fancy clothes, setting up a royal wedding. Your actions will destroy thousands and thousands of Indian lives in exchange for a pittance back west. It's a real part of British history. The game does not shy away from the atrocities committed by the East India Company in this time, and it can really leave you feeling remorseful for trying to win the game on its own terms. The themes are very strong in the game, but because the rumination on Empire might not be for everybody, this heavy setting could be a huge turnoff. Don't get me wrong, the game treats its setting and themes with tremendous respect, and it intertwines with the gameplay really, really well. And again, it often leaves you walking away wanting to learn more about this period of history. But because it's so intertwined, if you don't want to play a game that makes you feel terrible when you play it, you can't really ignore that aspect, so it really might not be for you. Like I said earlier, the game was originally released in 2017, so what should you do if you have and enjoy the original release? How does the second edition compare? While I do enjoy the first edition plenty, it always has felt a little incomplete to me. Some parts of the game felt a little throwaway or insignificant compared to other parts. The person in charge of shipping or manufacturing rarely has much to do outside of hoping to get promoted to a more advantageous position. The event system always feels a little clunky and weird. The promise cubes have a lot of potential in theory, but in practice, because they can be bought back at any time for cash, more often than not, they would be in lieu of any other exchange, making most of the promises ultimately a $2 IOU. Well, a lot of these issues have been greatly cleaned up in second edition, and nearly every corner of the game feels like it feeds into a larger picture in clear, tangible ways, while still having fun little nuances to discover over repeated plays. Every office has been given pretty significant boosts to their strengths, having many opportunities to hold the rest of the company hostage in unique ways while making moves that only their office can make. By focusing the promise system from non-specific cubes into a set of specific terms on cards, the narrow focus of each card allows more parts of the game to become a factor in how you wheel and deal. And then, of course, there is the physical production of the game. While the original release is fine and passable, it is clearly working on a pretty low budget. John Company 2nd Edition blows it out of the water here too. And honestly, very few games on the market can claim to have a more thoughtful, more high-quality production than this game. The pieces feel great to hold and move about. The art is beautiful and unique, with the central game board being one of my favorites in recent memory. The colors are bright, very pleasing to look at. Some of the iconography can be a little confusing at first. I think every group I've played this with has mixed up the victory point and power icons at least once. But in general, the whole game is really well thought out, and it's easy to use and a joy to get your hands on. The box isn't even obscene in size, being just a little bit thicker than Pax Pamir 2nd Edition from the same publisher. In the end, John Company 2nd Edition is a game that I know a certain type of gamer will adore, and another, perhaps more numerous type of gamer will detest. Hopefully this review gets across how I feel about the game, and gives you an idea of which of those two groups you might fall into. For my tastes, there are few other negotiation games I'd opt to play over this one. I'm Scott, thanks for watching.